Okay, wonderful. We are live, and joining us is Dr. Joseph Tucker from Magic Med Industries, a proud sponsor and partner.
Always a pleasure, and thanks everyone for listening today. My name is Dr. Joseph Tucker. I'm the CEO of Magic Med Industries. So I think this psychedelic space that we're all a part of is very, very interesting. Certainly there are a lot of different companies out there, a lot of different approaches to try to address these challenges. And I think that Magic Med is particularly unique and particularly interesting in that we have a very, very specific focus. We're looking very much to develop new drugs. We see the opportunity here to have the greatest possible impact, to be all around creating new drug candidates that big pharma can carry forward into this pharmaceutical sector. So I'll tell you all about that. But for a quick, just a little context for everybody, we know this is really all about mental health and treating mental health with a very, exciting new approach that's really just exploded in the last few years. But let's all remember just how prevalent mental health challenges are. Cuts across all demographics, all nations, all ethnicities, ages, you name it. And it's a very significant issue. But beyond that, the issue I think is that it's poorly treated. That the majority of patients, something like 70% of patients, report being undertreated. They need something better than what they have. Now, this sector has really, as I mentioned, really kind of blown up in the last few years, and it's really been led by some academics, some folks out of Imperial College London, UC Berkeley, Johns Hopkins, for example, and also some nonprofits. I think we're all probably familiar with USONA and MAPS and Compass. They themselves are actually a nonprofit to begin with before they switched over. And so it's kind of interesting. You have this sector with a very large market potential and a very large patient population that's poorly served. And yet the sector has been led to date by academics and nonprofits, not by pharma and big biotech, which is what you'd expect. And you might ask yourself, gosh, that's kind of curious. I wonder why that is. And it's not an accident. It's real. The reason is that these molecules that we all know of as psychedelics, like psilocybin or MDMA or ibogaine or the whole variety of ayahuasca, the whole variety of molecules, they're actually all generics. They're all either natural compounds and in some cases have been used by civilized societies for thousands of years, frankly, to do exactly what we're doing right now, to treat essentially anxiety and depression, or they're something that was created in a chem lab literally 50 years ago, and people have been tinkering with them a little bit since. So these are generic molecules, and the issue with generic molecules, one of the major issues with them, and certainly with natural molecules, is they need to be improved. You need to get them better, solve the side effect issues to get big pharma interested. And that hasn't happened yet. That's why we haven't seen big pharma in this sector. So just to take a step back for a second, I think we've all probably heard that this sector is, it's a 50 billion plus market. And I think that that's probably actually a very reasonable, perhaps even an understatement on the market opportunity. But what I think most people forget when they think about that is those numbers come from pharma. In other words, those numbers come from, look, if we can put drugs in a pill, put the pill in a bottle, send it home with the patient, that is a $50 billion market. And I think that's accurate. What we're seeing right now, though, the vast majority of the companies in the space, that's not what we're talking about. If you're talking about psilocybin, you're talking about LSD for treatments of say, PTSD or depression, you're talking about in-clinic administration. You're talking about patients needing to come in, sit down, have the set and setting that they're in controlled, have the therapist walk them through the session. And this all comes down to the therapeutic index of these molecules. You can't send them home with patients the way they are now because of the side effects, because of the hallucinations, because of the potential for bad trips. So if you really want to treat the majority of the patients, you need to solve those issues. You need to solve the hallucinations, solve the bad trips, solve the the vomiting afterwards. That's how you come up with a molecule that you can treat the larger number of patients with. That's when big pharma gets interested. And those molecules, they don't currently exist in this sector. Now, that's what MagicMed is totally focused on doing. That's our business, is creating those molecules. So when big pharma gets involved in true drug development, this is what it looks like. Not what we're seeing for the most part in the sector, which, companies sort of start in phase 1 or phase 2 with some existing psychedelic, with an abbreviated plan, but they skipped the entire early part of drug development, which is all about making the molecule that doesn't have the side effects, or that you can reduce the side effects. So the way big pharma does that is you start with hundreds or generally thousands of new molecules, and those new molecules, you start them based on the original molecule that you found in nature, which was very interesting and had some interesting effects. But you say, we want to solve these side effects, so we make thousands of derivatives based on them, but different. And you have to make thousands because you honestly don't know what change you have to make to the molecule in order to actually solve those side effect issues. So that asset, it doesn't exist in this sector, and that's what MagicMed is building. We call it the Cybrary, stands for Psychedelics Library. And it's a portfolio of molecules that are designed, tailored for big pharma to create new drugs, not just for the market in general, but actually tailored for the different indications within this whole clinical field. Now, we've had to come up with some pretty cutting-edge technology to do this, and it actually forces us to be very closely aligned with academic institutions ourselves. We have a pretty strong relationship with the University of Calgary. We have a number of professors in chemistry and biology and other departments that are working with us there. So let me just explain the technology, because I think this is really important. The molecules that most of the time we think about, like psilocybin, those are the natural molecules that came from nature, but you need to improve upon them. And even things that people have been working on for the last 50 years, like LSD and MDMA and relatives to those molecules, what people generally work with, what pharma works with, is chemistry. Chemistry is the standard approach, and chemistry is really great until it's not. There are some reactions that are difficult for chemists to run. And once you hit a reaction that you can't do, if chemistry is your only tool, you're pretty much stuck. Now life is actually a series of chemical reactions, and nature doesn't have the option of, when it runs up against a reaction that's hard to do, just throwing up its hands and saying, I guess we won't make that. It's not what nature does. Nature's actually come up with this really cool tool called the enzyme. So the enzyme basically is a protein that wraps around a chemical and forces it to undergo a chemical reaction that it doesn't want to undergo. So enzymes are this tool from nature that's what we're doing, is we're getting all these different enzymes from nature. We're combining that with chemistry, because chemistry still has some strengths. And together, we're making thousands of new molecules that neither chemists nor nature have been able to make before. And that's the Cybrary. So specifically, the Cybrary it's a repository of all these new molecules that we're making, these new drug candidates, and it's also all the patents that protect them. Because we're having to make these new molecules, we're able to get composition of matter patent protection. We're also able to get method of manufacture, because we actually had to invent the way to manufacture it. And then we're also able to get method of use. So it's really a multi-layer approach to protecting these molecules that, again, are completely new molecules. We're not talking about the existing molecules from nature, completely new. So where are we at right now in the Cybrary? We started initially on the tryptamine family, which is basically those molecules related to psilocybin from magic mushrooms, and DMT, which is from ayahuasca. And on those, we've already filed, this is a little bit out of date, we've already filed more than 14 patents on that and created, the protection for more than 100 million molecules, which is a huge library. So far, we've already actually synthesized more than 200 new molecules based on that. Now, compare that for a moment to, some of the other companies in the space that have maybe 1 or 2 or 5 molecules, or, a few of them that, like us, recognize the need for better molecules. they might have 50 new molecules, something like that. But we're talking, 200 so far, and we'll be making it more than 1,000 pretty quickly, just based on that one core structure. Next up is the mescaline and MDMA related molecules, where again, we expect to file around 10 patents, protect around 100 million molecules, and make around 1,000 new molecules. And we'll follow those with new molecules based on new derivatives based on ibogaine and LSD. So you can see we're creating a very large portfolio of all new molecules to test. Now, that's really important. That really differentiates us from, frankly, anywhere else in the space. But this also does this second piece, and it's we're coming at this what I think is honestly a revolutionary new way of designing drugs. So we start with the Cybrary, we start with all those new molecules. Then we go, and in a very high throughput fashion, we throw these molecules at all the different receptors. We do all the different farm talks. We throw these through animal models as well, peeking at mechanism, and we really develop a lot of knowledge that does not exist in the space right now. Nobody really knows what happens when you make all these different structures. How do they bind to the receptors? What effects do they have? Nobody knows, because we haven't had a large portfolio ever to test before. So the next thing we add to that is clinical data, is human data. And now our interest in human data is not so much, hey, if you take some psilocybin, do you feel depressed anymore? It's actually, when you take psilocybin, what neurotransmitters are firing in the brain? What are the other biomarkers? What electrical signals can be captured? And we take all of this information from humans, from animals, from receptors, and we plug it through a machine learning process that helps us design the next iteration of molecules. And this is the revolution part. This allows us to iterate, to go through several cycles, to progressively get more and more intelligent in how we design the molecule. And it gives us, as you can imagine, the ability to tailor make custom, novel drugs for all these different indications that are related but different. One thing you may clue into thinking about that is that process is going to create far too many high-value drug candidates for MagicMed to develop all by themselves. We're just going to make too many. So what falls out of that is a different business model than I think you'll see a lot of other companies do. And that is a very, very early partnering process so that we can partner with many different companies. What we want is to have 10 or 20 partners, each one taking a different unique molecule forward into a different clinical indication. So this early partnering gets us to work with the companies, the partners, very early on. They tell us right at the very beginning what kind of molecule they're looking for, what kind of indication they want to pursue, and so we can custom design those for them. And when we get to the molecule that they love, they can take that molecule and they take it forward through clinical trials, and we can do this multiple times in parallel. Something else that falls out of that, having multiple partners that come in very early, is a different revenue model. So working with the partners in the early days as we're designing these bespoke molecules for them actually enables us to charge them for R&D costs to actually to build those molecules. So we get revenues very early on with our partners. When a molecule is identified for the partner that they love and they want to carry forward, they license it exclusively, and now we receive milestone payments as they move that molecule through clinical trials. And ultimately, when it becomes an approved drug, you still get the big pharma, we still receive the big pharma royalties, which is the goal always in drug development. But along the way, we've managed to have milestone payments and R&D revenues that came in much, much earlier. And again, from many different partners, as opposed to just one, which is your classic model when someone decides we're going to develop one drug and take it all the way. It's very different, right? There's a huge amount of risk, high failure risk, a lot of capital is required, and you're waiting till that thing becomes approved before you ever have a sniff of revenues. Very different model from what we're doing at MagicMed.